The first red flag was the ladder leaning against my utility pole. I was coming back from the hardware store, hauling lumber for a new deck, when I spotted two guys in neon vests fiddling near the edge of my property. One had a drill in hand, the other was halfway up the pole. My pole sits squarely on the northeast corner of my lot. I own the land, and by extension, the pole that's been grandfathered into my deed since the 80s. I parked, got out, and hollered, "Hey, who told you could work on that?" The younger guy paused mid-step and looked down like he'd been caught stealing cookies. "We're just installing cameras for the HOA, sir." "Cameras? On my land?" I walked over, heart already pounding. "Who gave you permission?" The older one, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, muttered. "President said it was fine." "HOA jurisdiction," she said. And just like that, I knew exactly who was behind it. Glenda Jarrett's 50-something, with a voice like a blender chewing gravel, and a permanent scowl that could sour milk. She'd been riding me ever since I refused to repaint my shutters the exact shade of approved beige. She'd fine me twice for non-uniform mailbox aesthetics and once for excessive bird feeder activity. Whatever that meant. I told the guys to get down and leave, but they claimed Glenda had given them authorization. So I did what any rational man would. I snapped photos of their truck plates and told them they were trespassing. They packed up and left, but the damage was done. The camera was already up high on my pole, lens pointed straight at my driveway. I called Glenda. "No, Roger. Actually, you are in violation," she barked. "The HOA has every right to install surveillance for community safety." "Not on my land, Glenda. It's a utility pole. Utility means public. Don't be difficult." I hung up. I wasn't about to get into a legal debate with someone who once tried to outlaw front porch swings because they encouraged loitering. Now, here's the thing she didn't know. That pole? It was originally installed by my grandfather when he wired the old barn for electricity back in 1982. When the barn came down, no one removed the pole. I kept it because it was useful for running lights and cameras of my own. And since it's on my parcel, it's mine. I even have the documentation in the property survey. And you know what else I had? The power supply that fed the camera they just installed because they ran it into the outlet box I maintain on the pole. By the next morning, the camera was live. I saw the red light blinking as it stared down in my driveway like some HOA spy drone. That's when I decided I wasn't going to play polite anymore. I grabbed my ladder and climbed up there with a cordless screwdriver and a pair of wire snips. Took me less than 5 minutes. I didn't touch the camera, not yet. I just found where they'd tapped into my box, and I unplugged their little surveillance leech. That red light went dead. About an hour later, Glenda herself showed up, marching across my lawn in her ridiculous wedge heels like she was stomping grapes. "You disconnected the security feed," she accused, pointing a manicured finger at me. "I disconnected unauthorized equipment from my power supply." Big difference. This is a violation, Roger. You're interfering with HOA security infrastructure. No, Glenda, you violated the law by tapping into a private utility pole on private land without permission. I already filed a police report. Her eyes twitched. You can't do that. I can. And I did. And I got photos, property records, and about 2 hours of footage from my own cameras showing your installers trespassing. She stood there, stunned, like someone had yanked the batteries out of her megaphone. I didn't even wait for her reply. Just walked back inside, grabbed a cold soda, and waited. Because if Glenda thought that was the end of it, she had no idea what I had planned next. By noon the following day, I had a certified letter ready and sent to the county zoning office. Not because I needed to escalate things right away, but because I like leaving a paper trail when people start acting like they own what they don't. I also copied the letter to a friend of mine who works as a private land use consultant. We went to school together years ago, and he owed me a favor. I asked him to dig up anything unusual about our HOA's charter, particularly any amendments in the last 2 years. That HOA had a habit of slipping in community safety provisions during sparsely attended meetings and calling it a vote. I never trusted the way they documented things. By midweek, I had a response from zoning. As expected, the poll was listed under my parcel ID. I had a PDF copy from the county assessor's office with a clear note: no municipal or utility easements registered for this structure. Translation: Glenda had no legal excuse for wiring her camera into it. That same day, I noticed a new sign bolted to the stop sign at the end of our road. This area is under active HOA surveillance. Brand new, printed in glossy vinyl with the HOA logo at the top. It had the same typeface as the quarterly newsletter probably whipped up by Glenda's niece, who handled the aesthetic cohesion committee. I walked down and peeled it off. Not in a rush. Took my time, made sure someone saw me do it. Sure enough, within minutes, a gray pickup rolled to a stop outside my driveway. Steering wheel thumped once. Glenda didn't get out right away. She just sat, staring at me through the windshield like I'd keyed her car. When she finally stepped out, she held a clipboard and a manila envelope. She didn't offer a greeting. "You've been reported for destruction of HOA property. Then you'd better call the sheriff," I said, not even glancing at the envelope. "Because you're about to get served with a cease and desist." She blinked, caught off guard. I handed her a copy of the zoning confirmation and a notarized letter stating that any further tampering with the utility pole would result in civil trespass charges. I'd printed 2 copies, both signed and dated.
She didn't take it.
"You think you're clever," she said. "No, I think I'm tired. Of you. Of this nonsense. Of fake authority dressed up as community management." Her eyes narrowed. "You've always been difficult. Only when people try to walk over me." Then she did something I wasn't expecting. She handed me the envelope. "Have it your way. Consider this your final warning." I opened it as she drove off. Inside was a printed notice accusing me of violating the HOA's security non-interference policy. A fine of $250 was listed, with a 30-day deadline. It was signed digitally at the bottom, Glenda's name and title in bold, self-approved. That's when I decided to stop playing defense. I called my friend Brian, the land use guy.
He'd found something.
"The HOA changed its charter last summer," he said. "There was a vote to grant the board unilateral authority to install security features on any visible property. But get this, they didn't specify what visible means. And they didn't record the amendment with the county clerk. That makes it administratively invalid under your state's HOA compliance statute. Is that enough to challenge it? It's shaky. But there's more. They filed a tax exemption form 2 months ago listing themselves as a nonprofit. But their budget shows over $30,000 spent on private contractors. You can't do that and claim tax-exempt status unless those contractors are performing charitable services. Mounting cameras isn't one of them." I let that sink in for a moment. "You're telling me they committed tax fraud?" "I'm saying they might have. And if they've been collecting dues under that claim, they've opened themselves up to a class action." That night, I emailed every homeowner on my block. I kept it simple, just a scan of the zoning map, the cease and desist letter, and a brief note that said, "If they put anything on your property without consent, you have the right to remove it." By the weekend, 3 other neighbors had pulled down cameras. One of them, an elderly widow named June, hadn't even known she had one until her grandson spotted it during a visit. They'd installed it behind her shed, pointed toward her back door. June was furious. "I never agreed to that," she said, clutching the camera like it was a dead rat. "You didn't have to," I told her. "That's the problem." We met that Sunday evening at my place, June, myself, and 7 other homeowners who were fed up with the board. One of them, Lionel, used to work as an IRS auditor. He took one look at the financials I'd gotten from Brian and started laughing.
"They're done," he said.
"They've been misclassifying expenses and underreporting collected dues." If even half of this is accurate, they'll be paying penalties for years. We drafted a formal complaint to the state HOA Oversight Department. Not a petition, an affidavit supported, evidence-backed complaint. Lionel helped us word it in legal terms. We included copies of the zoning data, the unauthorized camera placements, the financial irregularities, and a list of residents willing to testify. Then we filed it. Certified mail. 1 copy to the state, 1 to the county tax assessor, and 1, just for fun, directly to Glenda's mailbox. By Tuesday, things got interesting. A black SUV with county plates rolled into the neighborhood mid-morning. 2 inspectors stepped out with clipboards and ID badges. I watched from the porch as they knocked on Glenda's door. She answered in a robe and slippers, looking like she hadn't slept. They were inside for over an hour. When they left, one of them stopped by my place. "You the one who submitted the complaint?" "I am." "Appreciate the documentation. There's enough here to trigger a full audit. If the HOA misused nonprofit status, that's a felony under state law." He handed me a card. "If you see anything else, call me direct." Later that evening, Glenda sent out an urgent community update via email. It was a rambling, defensive screed about false accusations and unauthorized interference by disgruntled residents. She claimed the board was reviewing its procedures and asked that all HOA matters be directed through legal counsel going forward. Nobody responded, because at this point, people had started talking to one another. Neighbors who hadn't said a word to each other in years were suddenly comparing notes, sharing letters, and digging up old violations that never made sense. Turns out, Glenda had been waiving fines for certain residents in exchange for proxy votes she used to pass all those shady amendments. By the end of the week, we had enough signatures to call an emergency election. And that was only the beginning. On the day of the emergency election, Glenda tried one last maneuver. She showed up at the community clubhouse an hour before the meeting, dragging 2 folding carts full of binders. Each one was labeled with a year, 2021 dues, 2022 fines, 2023 infractions. She stacked them like trophies on the folding table by the podium, then clipped on a wireless mic and started flipping through pages as if she was about to deliver a financial lecture to a room full of accountants. Only problem was, half the room had already seen what Lionel uncovered. No one was interested in hearing excuses from someone who'd been caught misclassifying HOA funds as community beautification while funneling them into private surveillance. "Before we begin," Lionel said as he walked to the front with a small stack of manila folders, "I'd like to introduce a few guests." 3 people stood up near the back. 2 in plain suits, 1 in a navy blazer with a state seal stitched near the shoulder. They weren't here for the election. They were here for enforcement. "This is Agent Dean Mallory from the State Department of Consumer Affairs," Lionel said. "And these 2 are from the County Tax Enforcement Division." Glenda froze halfway through flipping a page. Agent Mallory stepped forward with a calm, even tone. "We've reviewed the financials submitted by your HOA, including the most recent filings with the state. Several discrepancies were found, including misreported expenditures and unauthorized vendor contracts." Glenda's voice caught. "I don't understand. You signed the vendor agreements personally," he said, "including one for security equipment purchased off books. That's a violation of both your state's nonprofit compliance codes and your HOA's own governing documents." Murmurs spread across the room like a slow boil. Chairs creaked. Someone near the back whispered, "She's done." Mallory turned slightly. "We'll be conducting interviews. For now, please refrain from leaving the premises." Glenda sat down heavily, her mic still hot. The thump of the chair echoed over the speakers. The vote proceeded anyway. And it wasn't even close. Every board member loyal to Glenda was removed. Replacements were voted in with overwhelming support. I declined a nomination, but helped count the paper ballots. June, the widow who'd found the camera near her shed accepted a seat on the new board alongside Lionel and a retired firefighter named Dell who'd never attended a meeting before that night. After the vote, the three investigators met privately with the new board in the back room. I stayed outside, talking with neighbors who finally felt like their voices mattered again. When the door opened 30 minutes later, Lionel emerged holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a USB drive. "They found something else," he said quietly. The drive had been recovered from one of the HOA's security contractors, a man who'd been paid through a personal check from Glenda's account. Not the HOA's, hers. The drive contained nearly 6 months of footage from the cameras, but not the public-facing kind. These clips had been saved elsewhere on private storage, outside of the HOA's official cloud system. Most of it was innocuous. Driveways, side yards, mailboxes. But some of it had audio. And that's where things went from shady to criminal. Mallory called me 2 days later. "We've got evidence of illegal audio surveillance." Some of these recordings captured private conversations inside homes. One clip even caught someone giving out their credit card number on a porch phone call. "That's a wiretap," I said.
Exactly.
"And it was done without consent. That's a felony in this state." Glenda was arrested the following week. Not in handcuffs, not on camera, but it was real. Quietly picked up at her home and processed through a sealed warrant. The charges included wiretapping, tax fraud, and misuse of nonprofit funds. Her mugshot never hit the news, but the courthouse record was public. Lionel printed it out and pinned it to the community board just outside the clubhouse. The man who installed the cameras, the contractor turned state's witness, claimed Glenda paid him extra to install backup systems so she could personally monitor problem residents. He produced text messages, payment receipts, even a voice memo where Glenda said, "Make sure I can see Roger's driveway at all times. He's planning something, I know it." She was released on bond, but she didn't return to the neighborhood. Her house was listed for sale within the month. Her name was scrubbed from all HOA records, and the new board voted unanimously to dissolve the private security program. But that wasn't the end of it. There was still the matter of the fines years' worth levied under false pretenses. June alone had paid over $400 for code violations that never existed. Dell had been fined for planting tomatoes outside the approved garden zone. Another neighbor had been threatened with legal action for having unapproved wind chimes. So we organized a restitution committee. Lionel helped draft a petition requesting an audit of all fines collected during Glenda's tenure. We submitted it to the small claims court with 42 signatures. The state granted a review. Turns out, over 30 residents had been overcharged or fined without due process. The court ordered the HOA to issue refunds from the reserve fund, every dollar backed by receipts. It wasn't just about the money. It was about erasing the stain Glenda had left on our community. During all of this, I had my utility pole inspected by an independent contractor. He confirmed that the wiring the HOA ran could have caused a short if they'd overloaded the outlet. They had no idea what they were doing. If I hadn't disconnected it when I did, they might have started a fire. The new board passed a motion 2 weeks later. Any installation on private property required not only written permission, but a formal license agreement filed with the county. No exceptions. I watched the old cameras come down one by one. The pole at the corner of my lot stood empty again, just like it should have been. I left my own camera up, though. Not for surveillance. Just a reminder. One evening, June brought over a fresh baked pie pecan, her specialty. She set it down on the porch table and sat across from me, with an ease she hadn't shown before. "You know," she said, "I used to be afraid to speak at meetings. Didn't think anybody cared what I had to say." "They do now," I said. She nodded, then looked out at the street. "What you did wasn't just about the poll, was it?" "No," I said. "It was about who gets to decide what happens in our neighborhood. And making sure that if someone tries this again, they'll think twice. We sat in silence for a bit, watching the sun dip low. A kid rode by on a scooter, waving as he passed. Somewhere down the block, someone was grilling. The neighborhood felt lighter. Not perfect, but ours again.
And that was enough.
By the time summer settled in, the neighborhood had changed in subtle but unmistakable ways. Lawn chairs reappeared on porches that had sat empty for years. People lingered outside in the evenings, talking over fences, trading tools, offering help. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like something had been returned to us, something Glenda and her crew had quietly stolen over time. Still, there was one loose thread that bothered me. A few weeks after the emergency election, I got a call from a man named Peter Langley. He introduced himself as an attorney representing 3 former HOA board members. Not Glenda, these were the quieter ones, the ones who always sat 2 seats over and nodded at everything she said. Mr. Harrow, he said, my clients wish to ensure that their cooperation with ongoing investigations is acknowledged in any public statements issued by the neighborhood. Public statements? I asked. They're concerned about reputational harm. One of them is pursuing a job in local government. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Did your clients approve the installation of surveillance equipment on private property? I'm not at liberty to say. Then I'm not at liberty to help. Before he could respond, I hung up. I'd spent enough time dealing with cowardly enablers. If they wanted to clear their names, they could speak up in court. That same day, I received a certified envelope from the district prosecutor's office. Inside was a subpoena. I was being called as a witness in an upcoming evidentiary hearing. Apparently, the state was pursuing additional charges against Glenda, this time for something far more serious than misused funds or unauthorized surveillance. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday in the county courthouse. I arrived early, wearing my cleanest blazer and a pair of polished boots. The courtroom was small, tucked on the second floor of a sandstone building that smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana Cross, met me in the hallway. We've uncovered emails, she said. Internal HOA communications. Glenda was directing the surveillance efforts not just to monitor residents, but to pressure certain homeowners into selling. I blinked. Selling their homes? She compiled lists. Elderly residents. People behind on dues. Anyone who pushed back against her authority. She wanted them gone. I didn't say anything at first. The air around us felt heavier. She used the camera footage to fabricate violations, Dana continued. False fines, threats of lien filings, anything to make staying more expensive than leaving. Did anyone lose their home because of it? I asked. 2 families sold under duress.
We're trying to get statements from them now.
One already moved out of state. The judge entered the courtroom 10 minutes later. He was an older man, stern but not theatrical. The kind who didn't tolerate wasted time. Glenda sat at the defense table, her hair grayer than before, her posture deflated. Her new attorney looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. When Dana called me to the stand, I kept it clean. I described the utility pole, the unauthorized camera, the power cord I pulled, the cease and desist letter, the follow-up from zoning. I didn't embellish.
Didn't need to.
Then she asked about the aftermath. Did you hear from any neighbors who experienced similar installations? Yes, I said. Several. Some didn't even know they were being watched. Dana nodded and handed me a printed email. Can you read the highlighted portion aloud? I cleared my throat. Ensure Harrow's feed is active at all times. He's a disruptor. If he violates any property code, capture it on file. Flag anything that might justify a fine. She took the page back. Did you ever violate any code? Not once. The defense didn't cross-examine. Glenda didn't look up once during my testimony. After the hearing, I walked outside into the bright afternoon sun. Dana followed me out. She's being charged with coercion and abuse of civil process, she said. The surveillance was just the surface. What she did to those families using her position to force them out, that's what's going to bury her.
Good, I said.
People like her shouldn't hold power anywhere. She nodded. We'll be in touch if we need further testimony. As I drove home, I passed the corner where the pole once held that camera. The mounting bracket was still there, rusted now, almost invisible beneath the overgrowth. I didn't bother removing it. Let it rot. A little reminder of how far someone went just to control a neighborhood. The new HOA board didn't just stop at restoring order. They passed a motion to open all future meetings to full community attendance, no proxy voting allowed. They also instituted a rotating audit committee, 3 residents, selected randomly each year, to review financials and report back. No one could hold a board seat for more than 2 consecutive years. And as for the families Glenda tried to force out, the board reached out to both. One had already resettled in Oregon and declined further involvement. The other, a single mother named Talia who'd sold her place at a loss after repeated threats of fines and litigation, agreed to meet with Lionel and June. They listened. They apologized. And then they voted to set aside part of the HOA's reserve fund to reimburse her losses. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A gesture of decency in the place where cruelty had ruled. The final piece came 3 months later. I received a letter from the state attorney general's office. Glenda had accepted a plea deal. No jail time, but a lifetime ban from holding any position of authority in any HOA, nonprofit, or civic organization. She'd also agreed to pay restitution to the affected homeowners, including Talia. Her personal assets were being liquidated to cover the settlement. She moved out quietly. No one saw the truck. Her house sold under market value to a young couple with 2 toddlers and a Labrador that barked too much but made everyone smile.
The pole still stands.
I didn't replace the camera. I didn't need to. The neighborhood watches itself now. Not in the paranoid, silent way Glenda wanted, but with eyes that look out for each other. June organizes monthly potlucks. Del planted a community garden in one of the common lots. The kid on the scooter, his name's Marcus, started mowing lawns for $5 a yard. One evening, I was sitting on the porch when Lionel dropped by with a manila envelope. "Got one last thing for you," he said. Inside was a copy of the court's final disposition.
Case closed.
All charges resolved. No appeals filed. He took a seat beside me. "You think she ever believed she was doing the right thing?" he asked. "No," I said. "I think she believed she couldn't be stopped." He watched the street for a bit. A breeze stirred the leaves. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing guitar. She was wrong. I nodded.
Yeah,
she was. And that was that. No drama. No final speech. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing the line had been drawn, and this time, the people holding it were the ones who actually lived here.